Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So,
One Piece chapter 1098 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. First off, I just want to say that I hope Oda is doing okay. For everybody that has read the chapter, obviously you saw, and there's a little note as well in the cover page, that Oda was unable to finish his manuscript. Now this ends up happening to many Jump authors throughout their career. I've read a couple series, I've seen it happen before, and it's just because of the deadlines it's really difficult to do. And I could have sworn that this has happened to Oda and One Piece before, but apparently not. Oda, throughout his entire run, has never been late, which itself is incredible. But double-edged sword here, yeah, I'm kind of worried about him. So if Oda ends up taking a break sometime here soon, I don't know that that's the case, but if it does happen, yeah, I mean, we were prepared for it. But honestly, I kind of prefer to believe that it has nothing to do with his health or anything involving, it's just, this is a difficult chapter for Oda to write and draw. This was one of the darkest, saddest, and greatest chapters in all of One Piece. I hope everybody appreciates that we are reading peak One Piece right now. This flashback is one of the best in the entire story, in my opinion. Now, obviously, we all prefer different things. But for me, the best flashback in all of One Piece has always been Nami's flashback, Belmere, in Arlong Park, because of how that made me feel. You can also put Law's flashback and Corazon on that list as well. All of them have the same sort of vibe, and it's honestly what I love most from flashbacks. But if we're gonna sit here and straight up real talk for a moment, I've been missing these sorts of feelings from this story for a while. We've obviously had deaths recently, like pseudo-deaths like Pound, actual deaths like Pedro and Yasu, and I like those moments, but I don't absolutely love them. It's just not the same. There's very good deaths, there's emotional moments, and then there's chapters that literally break me. Two not flashback examples are Ace and the Going Merry. Easily some of the greatest moments in the entire story for me. And I am not joking when I say that this competes easily. But I have seen some mixed reactions to this chapter. Some people think that the chapter was mid, and it's just something that I've come to learn the more that I've been in the community. Basically, people just experience things different from me. Oda has outright stated that, he likes to make uplifting stories, which is the general feeling that One Piece gives you. One of the surprising interactions that I had when I wrote my book is written much darker than One Piece actually is, much more in line with this flashback. Which honestly makes sense because one of my core inspirations was Berserk. It lingers in a depressive energy state a lot. But one of the betas that first read it that assumed that they would like my story because they follow my thoughts on One Piece and thought it would be like One Piece, actually didn't like it at all because of the energy itself. And they essentially echoed Oda's sentiments of wanting to read uplifting stories. I also get similar comments about my music choice sometimes as well, because I specifically choose music that creates a sense of panic. I love it, but it literally unnerves some people. And it's just then that I realized that One Piece recruits, a lot of One Piece fans just want that kind of story. The darkness only works in small doses, and potentially sometimes not at all. This chapter was straight up traumatic, in an incredibly visceral way. I honestly don't even want to comp it with some of the things that we've already talked about, like Ace and like Nami, because it isn't just about the death being sad. It's truly a little bit disturbing, like the feeling that you get reading horror. So I kind of want to respect people that just thought that it was too much, because if that was your experience reading it, then, it is what it is. But for anybody out there that's read my book, I mean, it's just painfully obvious that this is the kinds of things from One Piece that I love the most. And you can certainly gather that given the choice, I would choose to recreate these moments more often. In a way, I guess you could say I'm kind of masochistic. I enjoy the pain. I want to feel heartbreak. This can actually be the entire appeal of a story, with no uplifting and all depressive. I don't like that either. I like a balance, but my balance is skewed way different than One Piece. So yeah, it's been a while since I've truly felt this way. And you might actually say that One Piece has never been darker. And for me, it's greatly appreciated. Not only for the emotion of the moment itself, but also for what it does for the story. I can tell you honestly that before this flashback, I was only somewhat invested in Kuma and Bonnie as characters. Like 7.5 out of 10. Bonnie has essentially cried throughout Egghead, and I haven't once felt anything other than curiosity as to what the story actually is. After this chapter, I would literally die to see them happy. This flashback almost guarantees that Egghead will end as a 10 out of 10 arc for me, which is just a flashback doing its freaking job. Like holy hell. But yeah man, enough beating around the bush, let's talk about it. Last week we were left on the cliffhanger of Ginny being captured and what would happen to her next. And guys, I speculated it in my first reaction pretty much on the nose. And I told you guys you wouldn't be prepared, and frankly neither was I. She was taken by some unnamed celestial dragon, made into that celestial dragon's wife, and Bonnie is not the daughter of Kuma and Ginny. Bonnie is the daughter of Ginny and a celestial dragon. This is honestly what makes the flashback so disturbing. I thought that Oda did an amazing job of pulling back from the initial emotion of the chapter to create some of those feel-good vibes later, mainly Kuma as a father. But this alone hurts me in a way that I can't really describe. Imagining how I myself might feel when put in a similar situation, I feel like I could murder somebody. I'm not even sure if this can be explained. Maybe it's just instinct. A lot of people said when I brought this theory up in my first reaction, this is never going to happen. One Piece is not going to go this dark. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, shit, we just had Big Mom's flashback relatively recently. Big Mom ate orphan children. That was implied. In a very similar way as what we are talking about here is implied. So if eating babies is on the table, then I thought, well, this could happen as well. And certainly I knew that it would hurt me. But that Big Mom flashback, which I love by the way, and also, side note, we also called that Big Mom ate the orphans. Those are two of my biggest hits on theories. But that was in no way disturbing to me. That was shocking. Like, I cannot believe that this just happened. Somehow, literally eating orphan children is less disturbing than what we got today. Just honestly. But Oda was not done inflicting pain. He took the knife and twisted it. Because as the wife of a celestial dragon, Ginny came down with an incurable disease. When exposed to sunlight, her skin turns sapphire and hard like a stone. So Ginny is finally able to leave because she is sick, and she gives one last call to Kuma and the Revolutionary Army, which was so utterly heartbreaking. Bro, it tears me up like you would not believe that Kuma was unable to hear her final words, which were, "I love you and always have." But he guesses correctly where she would be back in Sorbet, and he uses his paw fruit to arrive there. But it's too late. She's already died. He never got to say goodbye. But as is fitting in the world of One Piece, she dies, but Kuma inherits her will. In this case, her will was her daughter, Bonnie. So Kuma didn't get to say goodbye, but he did get to say hello. A concept that Oda touches on often in the story is the pain of living with and dying with regret. And he actually explicitly brings it up in the chapter Dragon Says It to Kuma, when Kuma decides to retire from the Revolutionary Army to take care of Bonnie. But Oda has masterfully weaved this concept into the story because how do you end up feeling regret? Well, it's because you haven't done something that you wanted to do. This is why the Strats whole ass pursue their dreams. It isn't just about accomplishing them. It's about knowing that you did everything in your power to attempt it. And that's partly what makes this chapter so heartbreaking for Kuma. We've seen that Kuma wants to be like Nika and performs that role for pretty much everybody in his life. In Kuma's mind, Nika is a liberator and a hero, freeing people from suffering, accomplishing dreams. But while this was the singular focus of Kuma's life, and I think that you can say that he performed this role as well as you possibly can without literally being Nika. But he wasn't perfect, and Ginny is the quintessential example of that. With Ginny, Kuma failed to be Nika. He could never give her what it is that she actually wanted. And good God, it hurts. If for no other reason than, Kuma has done so many amazing things in his life. But this was the low-hanging fruit. This should have been the easiest. It reminds me that, again, another big message of One Piece is to live freely, and a thing that restricts freedom is fear. You can't do what you want to if you are afraid to try. Personally, I try to live my life every day as best as I can with this in mind. And honestly, I think that fears are the root of pretty much all evil that exists. But certainly, fears are largely responsible for regrets. Justifiably, because of Kuma's own past, he was afraid of loving and being loved by Ginny. He thought he would only bring her suffering. And it should be understood that Kuma is a deeply religious person. Nika is his Jesus, and there's a reason why he was always carrying a Bible. There's a certain way that he wanted to live his life. And to me, he comes across as deeply introspective and thoughtful. So every decision was weighed. Basically what I'm saying is Ginny was a big part of his life, and there's no doubt that he spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not to pursue a relationship, knowing full well that he would never love anybody else. And I think ultimately he decided that the Nika thing to do was to avoid causing more suffering, so they could never be together. But Kuma straight up had it wrong. You can't be free if you run from pain. In parts he embraces this, and in others he doesn't. And I find the commentary here incredible about a religious figure like Kuma, truly heartfelt he believed in Nika and wanted to reflect Nika. But somebody who had dedicated his entire life to it missed the point. Delusion is a very real thing that many people experience, including myself, and it's really hard to break it. While he spends his entire life freeing people, he never once thought to free himself. This contrast is so glaringly obvious when you look at Luffy, who is the literal Nika of the story. Luffy is selfish, and he's not shy about it. Like, my man says that he doesn't share his meat. Everything that he does is for his own benefit. So far in the story, Luffy doesn't really pursue the freedoms of others, he really just pursues his own freedom. It just so happens that he's very good-natured, makes friends easily, and is empathetic. So what's best for Luffy ends up best for a lot of people. So Kuma looked at it oppositely. Freedom for others, but not for himself. He became shackled by his desire to be Nika. And it's because of that that he will most definitely die with regrets. And ultimately, he has created needless suffering. And even worse, man, for the person that he loved the most. It's all derivative of fear. Fear of not living up to Nika. Fear of his own bloodline. And fear of harming the people that truly mattered. What did this fear do for him? Nothing. The reason that he and Jinny couldn't be together is because he didn't want to associate with her, because he would bring her suffering. And then what happens? She suffers anyway, probably worse, because he couldn't give her what she wanted, and was right at the edge of her fingertips. Oda beautifully and symbolically captures a little bit of this with Kuma leaving without hearing Jinny's last words, that she loved him. He spent his whole life not listening, and therefore it's fitting to do so at the end. Luffy, the actual Nika in the story, says this on several occasions in the story, "I can hear you." The desires of his friends and his loved ones are literally the most important thing to Luffy, and fear will never hold him back, and that's what makes him a better Nika. This is the moral of the chapter, guys, and I resonate with it wholeheartedly. I basically think that you cannot write it any better. But yeah, man, let's take a moment and just talk about Jinny. Jinny is such an incredibly great character. How she patiently waited for Kuma the entire time, man, it breaks me. I don't really think that she could have or should have done anything different. I mean, she was pretty explicit. I think that she was pushy, but like I said, delusion is hard to break. Kuma obviously needed time to grow. In a way, kind of like Gold D. Roger, she just arrived a little too soon. And sometimes life can be like that. This is also kind of the point of Luffy and Nika in the story. Kuma was trying to be like Nika, but the legend exists because this character is one day supposed to show up. The idea is that there's some desires that we can't accomplish on our own. We just can't. We need help. And for Kuma, it was obviously about his buccaneer blood. For Kuma to have his good future, the Celestial Dragons need to be dethroned. They have to be. I honestly believe that Jinny encouraged Kuma to join the Revolutionary Army. We talked about this in the last chapter review, but I think it's just painfully obvious that just the same in God Valley, Jinny was the one responsible for calling the Revolutionary Army to Sorbet and essentially setting Kuma out on this path. And it's interesting that while Kuma might die with regrets, I'm not certain that Jinny will, or did. I don't think that she ever gave up on him, or frankly on herself. So the Revolutionary Army fought for a salvation that could give her and Kuma the future that they both desired. It's another thing that's just really fitting in the story. It was always an impossible dream. The odds were long that they would succeed, but it didn't stop her from pursuing it. Essentially, Kuma was her one piece. He was her treasure at the end of the adventure. We don't see Jinny clearly in the chapter, but as she's giving her final goodbye, she is actually smiling, just like a D would do, meaning she gave it her all. And honestly, part of me is so thankful that she was able to have Bonnie. Honestly, it would have made sense to me if Jinny had held some anger at the Celestial Dragons for creating Bonnie. But it's clear that she never looked at it that way. I want to believe that Jinny believed that Bonnie was like the spiritual child of her and Kuma, but I'm not certain if that actually makes sense to me. I think it's noteworthy that you never see Jinny ask Kuma to take care of her. Like the thing that Jinny fell in love with Kuma from the very beginning, we could see this in God Valley, like the first moment that they see each other, she was just blown away at how selfless Kuma was. He would gladly suffer for other people, even people, especially people that he didn't even know. That's the person that she fell in love with, and he never changed. So it's fitting that if this is a quality of Kuma that she loved deeply, that she herself might be influenced by it. Maybe she thought the knowledge of this child would bring Kuma suffering. It's then also fitting that she was wrong in the same way that Kuma was wrong. Certainly the knowledge of what had occurred to her brought Kuma great pain, but pain is what he spent his entire life accepting. And this was just a magical thing that the chapter was able to accomplish. We started so freaking heavy, man. And then it's like from all of this pain spawned great joy. Kuma loved Bonnie no less despite her blood. And of course he did. That was the entire point of Kuma's story. As a buccaneer, he was hated because of blood that he could not control. So he would never ever do that to Bonnie. Seeing her grow up and Kuma as her father was so unbelievably wholesome. Obviously tarnished somewhat by the fact that we end the chapter with uncertainty, knowing that more tragedy is to come. But that snapshot was beautiful. The balance, in my opinion, elevated this chapter beyond God tier. It's just really impressive how Oda was able to get the most out of all the feelings you could have had from the chapter. Even like polar opposite emotions. But anyway guys, let's take a breath and take a step back. I made a theory video a few weeks ago that Oda has already spoiled Egghead, and in that video we talk about the parallels between Egghead and Sabaody. Links in the description as per usual. But essentially the premise of that video was that you could utilize Sabaody in order to make predictions about Egghead, and this chapter once again made that come true. Not in a way that we actually predicted, but Kuma's whole story, this whole flashback between him and Jinny was all foreshadowed in Sabaody. When I speculated that Bonnie might be the child of Jinny and a Celestial Dragon in the last chapter review, there was a couple comments that said that this is not how the Celestial Dragons work. They won't share their blood. But this idea of Celestial Dragons taking wives as they want to was set up, foreshadowed, demonstrated in Sabaody. Charlos is walking down the street, he sees a girl that he thinks is pretty, and he's like, you are my wife now. This would have been his 8th wife, and upon hearing this, he's like, I'll just get rid of one of the other ones. And there's a ton of drama between him and the husband, and so Oda has taken that to infinity here in Egghead. So I'm claiming this as a dub as part of that theory, because that theory isn't just about making specific predictions and trying to figure out what's happening, but it's to communicate that these two arcs are related and that you can actually use it to make predictions, which, that's what happened. I honestly should have brought it up, but at the time we did not know that Jinny existed. But this idea of these Celestial Dragons being protective of their bloodlines could actually end up being true. And I just want to throw that idea out to you. The general impression that I got from the story is that the Sapphire Scale is an STD. This itself works on a number of levels because essentially the symptoms of the disease turns people into dragons. So why it's called Sapphire Scale. It's also fitting that people die in wealth, covered in jewels. No other disease that we know of can better symbolically represent the Celestial Dragons than this. And as a side note, the moment that it's revealed, the origins of the name Jewelry Bonnie was just incredible. But like I said, my initial impression while reading was that this was an SCD that is just present in Mary Joie, shared between Celestial Dragons, 2 slaves, and otherwise it's just there. And certainly this would explain why both Jinny and Bonnie do not appear to be contagious, because it's sexually transmitted. But a part of me wonders whether it's actually secretly protocol in Mary Joie for the human wives of the Celestial Dragons and their children to be purposefully infected, as a way of not diluting blood. Essentially, every Celestial Dragon that we see in Mary Joie is pure blood. The half-blooded children always die. They make it so, with this rare incurable disease that you don't happen to find anywhere else in the world. But a part of me also wants to believe that while this may usually be the case, it may not always be the case. I think that I would look to this as potentially what would explain the God's Knights. Something about them is different. And for me, it intuitively makes sense that they might be half Celestial Dragon. Like, honestly, it's just really difficult for the world government to control all these Celestial Dragons. They go different places, they do what they want when they want, so it's possible for them to have children across the world that, unlike in the case of Jinny and whoever her Celestial Dragon husband was, they couldn't watch them. So they discover children later in their lives. And then that sets them on a different path. Honestly, a lot of this reminds me of Game of Thrones, and we know for a fact that Oda has been introduced to and loves Game of Thrones. But in Game of Thrones, just like Sapphire Scale, there's a character in that story that suffers from the same sort of birth, incurable disease. Scales begin to cover her body progressively over time, and it's thought that she would die young. Likewise, Game of Thrones delves deeply into the idea of kings or gods having bastard children everywhere, and for these children to come back up in the story. I want to get really tinfoil here for a moment and know that this is most likely not the case, but I like the thought, and I hope that it's true, but it's never really explained Ginny's past before she became a slave in God Valley. But she was already a master wiretapper. Oda obviously may never explain this, but he could. I said this in a video recently, but the only intuitive thought that I have about this is that maybe Ginny, as a child, was like a recruit of Cypherpole. Personally, I think that it would be a cool story for Ginny to have been recruited, and essentially she failed. She washed out of the Child Cypherpole Development Program. Not because she was incompetent or unable, but basically she had too much heart. And to sort of erase her existence, she was made into a slave and sentenced to death. But this theory actually works better, taken with the concept that God's knights are half celestial dragons. Ginny grew up somewhere away from Mary Joie, and then was later discovered to have celestial dragon blood. She was kidnapped or purchased and taken back to the Holy Land to begin the God Knight's admission process. Important, I presume, among all of this is pretty much worshipping the celestial dragons and adopting their way of life. One way or another, Ginny failed, but in the meantime possibly had a very justified reason to obtain Cypherpole-related skills. So once again, it would make sense for the celestial dragons, the government, to sentence her to death. They absolutely do not want half celestial dragons running around that they cannot control. Once again, I want to reiterate that this is speculative, but what this does for Ginny, especially with this flashback now with Bonnie, is just incredible. Because Bonnie is half celestial dragon, supposedly. But so is her mother. Do you guys understand how crazy it would be to foreshadow the sort of generational atrocities of these celestial dragons through one family? Oda also threw in a line that Ginny, as a member of the Revolutionary Army, caught the eye of a celestial dragon, which is how she ended up that celestial dragon's wife. This makes so much more sense if Ginny herself is half celestial dragon, is kind of on their radar. But yeah guys, I think the trouble with this theory is, obviously, if it's true, at some point you would expect Oda to reveal it in some way, right? That could be difficult. So I'm going to throw out an idea to you guys. I want to believe this with all of my heart. Obviously, we'll find out. Whatever happens, happens. I think Bonnie's father is Figurlin Garling. Garling, being a present figure in the world government and the Celestial Dragons, makes for his story to be likely to come up. I think that he is also Shanks' father, and this sets up Garling as sort of a character who's having a lot of children. Obviously, if Oda were to introduce the Celestial Dragon that took Ginny forcefully as his wife, it would need to be one of the Celestial Dragons that are like that. And I think that is likely for Garling to be this way. But with the previous theories that we've made about God's Knight specifically already being half Celestial Dragon, it makes this theory work on another level entirely. Oda can communicate the story of Ginny and Bonnie through Garling and Shanks. And honestly, just looking at Garling, comparing him with Bonnie, contrasting it with Ginny, I could see it. A theory that we threw out in the comments video recently was that Bonnie was Ginny. But one of the reasons I had a hard time fully investing in this idea is that Bonnie and Ginny don't look exactly the same. And I think the biggest difference is their eyes. Bonnie does not have Ginny's eyes. Bonnie, however, does have Garling's eyes. So I'm just telling you guys, you heard it here first. We've got receipts. But anyway, back to the chapter at hand, right? It just seems like after what we get in this chapter, what comes next is kind of obvious. Kuma will search for a cure for Bonnie, ultimately end up successful, probably due to Vegapunk, but the price will be his freedom and personality. It is also likely that Kuma will be forced to become king of Sorbet and end up a tyrant in order to protect Bonnie. If she sees any light at all, she probably dies, and that's going to force Kuma's hand. Or paw, I guess. So is this it, guys? Have we figured it out? Is this the chapters to come? You guys already know that you click on Joy Boy Theories because you're here for the tin foil. And I don't think that this is all that Oda has left to cook. Everyone right now is making the assumption that Vegapunk will be able to cure Bonnie's incurable disease. But guys, Vegapunk is not a doctor. He is a scientist. He is an inventor. This alone bothers me. I think Vegapunk is incredible, but I don't think that he low diffs the entire medical community. So I want to let you guys know I think that there is a happy ending to this story. But before we get there, Jewelry Bonnie has already died. Her disease could not be cured. Sapphire Scale killed her. Vegapunk simply cloned her, which is something that we actually know that he can do. And Kuma inserted memories he was forced to take in order to fulfill his promise, which is also a thing that we know for a fact he is capable of doing. While this theory may not be necessary, I think that this is the level of cooking that we've come to expect from Oda, especially within this flashback. Why not? Honestly, I just think it's incredible. It sets up another emotional moment. Bonnie never makes it to her 10th birthday, but Kuma has to make that happen. In an absolutely tragic moment, he pushes all of who she is out of her, just the same as he has done for himself. Vegapunk is capable of making clones. He's also capable of accelerating those clones' growth, but Kuma doesn't want her to have a short life. I also don't think that he wants her to know that she ever died. So literally as a baby, they gave her her devil fruit and her memories so that she can believe that life continued normally. I actually think that this theory checks out and is probable because we've seen Bonnie as she appeared out of the ocean at the beginning of Egghead, and the ocean presumably strips her devil fruit of its abilities that she would be using on herself naturally. Straight up, the Bonnie that appears there does not look 10 years old to me. As a point of reference, we see Kuma and Ginny in the flashback in God Valley. They are less than 10 years old. They're like 7 or 8. And in my opinion, they look older than Bonnie appears at the beginning of Egghead. It seems very probable to me that the Bonnie that we see is actually 5 years old. And that the Bonnie in the flashback that we are reading right now, she dies now in Sorbet. This also works really well in my opinion because Oda has planted some foreshadowing about cloning with Ginny. The fact that one of Vegapunk's altars looks like Ginny. I think that Kuma tried to do that as well. The issue obviously is that Kuma never was able to push out Ginny's memories, so it could never really be her, and that makes a big difference. All this also reminds me a lot of Thriller Bark. We've also talked about Thriller Bark parallels recently in the story, and this would essentially make Kuma the same as Hogback. Hogback loved a woman in Sindri. She tragically died, and he tried to bring her back to life, but ultimately failed. Straight up, guys, I think that this is also very likely to have happened. But anyway, I told you guys that there would be a happy ending to this story, and I would say that, you know, taking every detail away from the flashback, the feeling that it's left me with is an overwhelming desire to protect Kuma and Bonnie. Like, I want nothing more than for those two characters to be happy and be able to continue their lives peacefully together. All this theory crafting has made it obvious to me that Kuma in his current form dying, which I always thought was likely to happen, doesn't really matter because who he is has already been removed, and most likely he did this on purpose. It was his intention. So even if Kuma makes it to Egghead and literally dies protecting Bonnie, which would be incredibly fitting, doing for her what he failed to do with Ginny. Even if he dies, he won't. It'll just be his broken body, nothing more. Kuma will return. But Oda might not do this exactly how you think that he might do it. Of course, it's plausible that a new body is created or selected for Kuma that will house his memories so that he can continue living pretty much as he did before minus the Paw fruit. But Bonnie having gone into the locked room in Vegapunk's laboratory and interacted with Kuma's memories might complicate it. This is all entirely dependent on what Oda actually wants, but Oda might not find it fitting for Kuma to survive here. Maybe this is just the time that Kuma should die. He lived his life. The adventure for him is over. So this could also work symbolically, where Bonnie has already absorbed Kuma's memories, and everything that he was remains within her. Like Dr. Hugh Luke says, you die when you are forgotten. And certainly Bonnie would never forget him if this is what happened. So even though this is still more somber, I do think that this is a legitimate possibility. But I would say that I don't totally believe this because we do see Bonnie emerge from Kuma's memories, and the bubble still seems to be present, which is a ray of hope for me. And I like to believe that Bonnie believing that all of the pacifista are literally her father, some kind of foreshadowing that any one of these pacifistas could become her father with his memories. But anyway, guys, I am hoping and I am praying that Oda has some mercy on Kuma and Bonnie because I'm just rooting for them so much. I want them to get everything that they want in the exact way that they want it. And I can't imagine that Bonnie wants to exist with Kuma's memories inside of her as if he's like actually dead. She wants her actual father to be around, to be able to talk to him. So I really hope that that's how Oda decides to conclude this arc. And at the same time, despite how dark the story has been in this flashback and how uncomfortable it might have made some people, I think all of this reinforces my belief that Egghead is going to end on a much more positive note. Things like Nika, that's just a theme and idea that Oda has carried through not only this entire arc, but specifically this flashback. And for Luffy to be Nika, and the effect that that's going to have on Bonnie and Kuma's story, I think is only going to be positive. Honestly, I can't wait for the moment that Bonnie realizes that Luffy is Joy Boy. I have to go back and look, but I don't think that Bonnie's actually seen Luffy transform yet. And in retrospect, it's like, wow, Oda intended that. Or maybe Bonnie has seen him transform but doesn't yet know what that means, which could absolutely be clarified in a conversation with Saturn, who just knows. It's just setting up to be a really special moment. And on the topic of Saturn, once again, all of this just fills me with optimism that there is absolutely no way that Saturn leaves this arc alive. There is no way. In my opinion, Luffy must fulfill both Kuma and Bonnie's desires or dreams here. Which means Saturn, both as a character who actually played a role in Kuma's story, but also as sort of this representative figure of these celestial dragons here, has to fall. But obviously, we'll see. I'm not writing the story, and I don't want to ever claim that. But in my opinion, I want to impress upon you that I believe that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So don't give up hope. But anyway, guys, I think that's the majority of what I wanted to talk about from this chapter. The only other thing really is just an acknowledgement that there's still elements of Bonnie's story that we don't understand yet. Bonnie as the Dowager Queen Connie, right? I think that that's most likely just Bonnie. Bonnie as a baby, she changes her ages around. There's something going on with Mary Joie, a relationship with a Kainu. You know, there's details here I'm assuming that Oda has an answer for, and we will get them. But I don't feel overwhelmingly motivated to speculate. I'm just going to throw out, though, that in the reading comments video we just made, it was like a speculation that we had is that Akainu doesn't actually... The reason why he was so scared when Bonnie escaped the government wasn't because of Kuma. It being Kuma never made any sense because Kuma had, at this point, already lost his personality. He couldn't recognize Ivankov. Why would he recognize Bonnie? Therefore, why would Bonnie having escaped matter? So I thought that Akainu's fear about Bonnie leaving Mary Joie had something to do with Bonnie herself. Maybe as some sort of experiment of Vegapunk that makes more sense. Or maybe she's special in a way that we still do not understand. But yeah, guys, I'm going to go ahead and nominate this chapter right now. This is, in my experience, in my opinion, the best chapter of One Piece that I have ever covered live. To me, it's equivalent of reading Marineford and Ace's death when it happened, but I wasn't there for that. I understand that not everyone's going to agree. You can certainly put up the reverie, the reveal of Emu is certainly way up there, but it appeals in a different way. But I would compare this to the joy that I felt with the reveal of Gear 5th Luffy. Gear 5th Luffy was incredible visually, obviously, but also a big part of it was how Oda had foreshadowed it for so long and intricately weaved all the little tiny threads together. This is exactly the same as that. Absolutely incredible narratively, symbolically, and thematically. But this chapter straight up clears because of the additional punch emotionally. So in my opinion, this is the absolute pinnacle. Doesn't get better than this. But as always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Whether you know something from the chapter that I might have missed, just share your thoughts. Remember to check out my book, The Booms, links in the description. And if you guys happen to read it, please leave a review. Let other people know what you thought about it. But yeah, like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.